I was 12 years old the year my sister, Sarah, moved into the Ghould House. Nearly 3 decades have passed since those bleak winter days in southern Maine, yet every recollection of that place still sinks like a stone in my gut. It was an old house, one of those stately New England homes that seemed to hunch against the fierce Atlantic winds, a testament to centuries gone by. Looking at it, you got the feeling it might have been genteel once. Large windows, now cracked and dirty, peeling shutters, and an ornate front door bearing the worn crest of the Ghould family. Sometimes I close my eyes and see the battered door, hear it creak ominously in the wind, and feel the dread coil inside me all over again. Sarah and her fiancé, Noah, had moved there because it was all they could afford. Even in the mid-1990s, Maine's coast wasn't cheap, but this place was suspiciously within their modest budget. They brushed off the idea that there might be a catch, unbeknownst to them. Others had tried living there, only to leave under puzzling circumstances. Our mother told Sarah the rent was almost too good to be true, but at first, everyone assumed it was just because the house was ancient, not updated, maybe difficult to heat in harsh winters. None of us wanted to acknowledge it might be haunted, though rumors about the Ghould House had circulated through that region for decades, maybe even longer. I was young then, more curious than frightened. But that curiosity would soon vanish, replaced by bone-deep terror. In the months to come, I'd experience events that tested my beliefs about what was real and what lay beyond. You can chalk it up to an overactive imagination, but I saw things that simply cannot be dismissed. My rational mind still struggles to accept what transpired in that towering house, empty hallways, dusty rooms, and echoing footsteps that never felt alone. If you asked me then if I believed in ghosts, I probably would have given a shaky maybe, or said that I wanted proof. But Ghould House gave me more than proof. It gave me nightmares I still can't shake. First impressions. My first trip to Ghould House occurred on a crisp fall weekend, just a few weeks before Halloween. Sarah had invited us, Mom, my brother, Eric, and me, to come see the property. Sarah and Noah had spent the day before hauling in boxes from the moving truck, but plenty of the place was still in disarray. My mother's car bumped along the narrow, twisted driveway lined with tall, spindly pine trees that rattled in the breeze. It was the kind of place where the wind seemed to whisper in your ear, a soft hush that set your nerves on edge. We reached a clearing and at last laid eyes on the house. 2 stories tall, with an attic. Perched up top like a watchful sentinel, it loomed over us. The roof sagged here and there, weighed down by time. Curling vines clung to the rotting wooden planks along the foundation, as though nature were trying to reclaim it. A battered old barn stood a short distance behind, its red paint long since faded to a dull rust color. My mother exhaled sharply the moment she saw it all. She didn't say a word, but the tension in the car was thick enough to stifle breathing. As Sarah led us inside, that tension only grew. Even then, in the broad afternoon light, the interior felt strangely shadowed. The foyer opened into a long corridor, with a steep wooden staircase climbing to the second floor, every step squeaking ominously with the slightest pressure. I remember feeling a bit dizzy looking upward. The banister was intricately carved, but worn, as if countless hands had slid across it through the decades. The air smelled faintly of old leather, mildew, and something else, an intangible odor that made me shiver in spite of myself. As Sarah led us inside, that tension only grew. Even then, in the broad afternoon light, the interior felt strangely shadowed. The foyer opened into a long corridor, with a steep wooden staircase climbing to the second floor, every step squeaking ominously with the slightest pressure. I remember feeling a bit dizzy looking upward. The banister was intricately carved, but worn, as if countless hands had slid across it through the decades. The air smelled faintly of old leather, mildew, and something else, an intangible odor that made me shiver in spite of myself. I drifted from room to room while Sarah described her plans, how she wanted to paint the living room a lighter color, how she planned to refinish the hardwood floors. At 12, I wasn't particularly interested in interior design, yet some details stuck with me. In the living room, the wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling, exposing blotchy plaster. An antique fireplace stood in the corner, soot staining the mantel. I thought the place could be beautiful if properly restored, but a strange claustrophobic feeling clawed at my chest. It felt like the house was watching. At one point, Mom asked Sarah, "Where's the fuse box? Did you check the wiring?" Sarah shrugged. "No one wants to do that tomorrow," she replied, smiling. "Why?" "You worried something might short circuit and burn down the place?" Mom forced a tight laugh. "Let's just say I'd feel better knowing it's safe." Her tone was dismissive, but her eyes flicked warily toward the walls. I think all of us sensed something was off, though none of us were prepared to voice it. You don't want to say, "I've got an eerie feeling about this house," when you're supposed to be celebrating a family member's new home. So we kept it to ourselves. As they talked, I wandered outside. I was restless. Something about the interior unnerved me, and the crisp air felt like a relief after standing in that enclosed hallway. My new toy gun, one of those plastic ones that clicked when you pulled the trigger, was still in the car, so I grabbed it, feeling inexplicably safer with anything, in hand. Then I strolled toward the edge of the driveway, under a canopy of pines. The wind hissed between the branches. I was only out there a few minutes when, out of nowhere, a sudden, acute panic seized me. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it pulsing in my ears. My fingers went clammy around the plastic grip of my toy gun. I felt as though someone stood right behind me, close enough to touch. Spinning, I found no one, not a soul, but that suffocating sense of being watched intensified. My breath came in quick, ragged bursts, and a single thought filled my mind: run as fast as you can. Without stopping to think, I bolted toward the house. My legs felt tangled, and I stumbled, scraping my hands on the gravel. But I didn't pause. I half crawled, half sprinted to the open doorway where my mother stood. She and Sarah stared at me, alarmed. I must have looked half mad, breathless, hair disheveled, cheeks flushed. I tried to explain that I felt something near me, but they chalked it up to the nerves of a kid in a new, creepy place. Sarah ruffled my hair and said not to worry, that I'd warm up to the house eventually. I glanced back over my shoulder at those whispering trees. I knew then, whatever lurked around Ghould House, it was no friend of mine. That was my first impression of the property, a silent, smothering dread that I couldn't explain. It set the stage for all that followed. Less than 2 weeks later, Sarah and Noah officially moved all their belongings in. Mom, Eric, and I helped with boxes and furniture. The atmosphere in the house was a bit chaotic that day, but it was nothing overly terrifying. Just that same background note of unease, like a faint, dissonant chord that never resolved. We found relics from previous occupants in the attic, dusty trunks, half-eaten by moss, piles of old photographs, corners curled with age, antique chairs that threatened to collapse at the slightest motion. The photos were the most intriguing and unsettling. Grainy, black and white images of men in old-fashioned suits, women in black dresses with stiff white collars, and hats. Some had "Ghould family, 1927" scrawled on the back. Others bore no identifying marks at all, just expressions of solemn dread on faces long dead. When we showed Sarah a batch of these pictures, she frowned. "I wonder if any relatives of the family still live around here," she mused. Noah, who had come up behind her, shrugged. "Probably. The name's not that common, but you never know." A slight furrow pinched his brow, betraying his own discomfort. Even the always skeptical Noah seemed disturbed by these eerie glimpses into the house's past. In one photo, a tall man with hollow cheeks stood at the top of a grand staircase. The staircase we'd walked up and down all day, hauling boxes. A flicker of recognition made my stomach twist. He wore a dark, ill-fitting suit, and a full mustache obscured his mouth. There was something hollow in his eyes, something I couldn't stop looking at. It was probably just an old family portrait, I told myself, but later on, as the final boxes were brought indoors and evening set in, I found myself unconsciously avoiding that staircase. It was as if the house itself was pressing me away from it. I told myself I was just tired, but the tension in my chest never ceased. That first night we all spent in the living room, half celebrating, half too exhausted to do much else. The heat worked, though the pipes clanged loudly, echoing through every corridor. The wind rattled the windows. Shadows bent in weird shapes across the walls. I could see something like a silhouette near the entry to the kitchen, but when I blinked, it was gone. I decided it was only my imagination. I refused to let the fear sink in too deep, hoping that once we left and returned home, the unease would fade. I was wrong. A growing sense of dread. My mother worked in a small city about 40 minutes away, so it made sense to bring me and Eric to a private school closer to her office. That commute was long, and since Sarah's new place was also in that same area, we formed a plan. After school, Mom would drop me off at Ghould House rather than leave me at our own home alone. Then Sarah, once she finished her errands or came back from picking up my niece, would babysit me until Mom got off work. It was a simple arrangement, but it meant I spent quite a few afternoons alone in that house. Sarah was often still out shopping or taking my niece to dance classes, leaving me in that hulking, deserted structure until she returned. At first, I tried to pass the time in the living room, reading or doing homework. However, every so often I'd hear faint footsteps on the second floor. I'd freeze listening, heart pounding. The footsteps would pause, then resume, pacing a short distance. There was never any distinct sound of doors opening or closing, just this soft, rhythmic tread. I told myself it had to be an old house shifting in the wind or the pipes rattling, but it sounded like actual footsteps, like someone was there. At first, I tried to pass the time in the living room, reading or doing homework. However, every so often I'd hear faint footsteps on the second floor. I'd freeze listening, heart pounding. The footsteps would pause, then resume, pacing a short distance. There was never any distinct sound of doors opening or closing, just this soft, rhythmic tread. I told myself it had to be an old house shifting in the wind or the pipes rattling, but it sounded like actual footsteps, like someone was there. As the days passed, my fear tightened into a permanent knot in my gut. Sarah would come home to find me anxiously staring at the ceiling or jumping at every creak. She teased me for being so high-strung. You're letting your imagination run wild, she'd say, smiling. But I think even she heard strange sounds when she was alone. She just hid it better. One night, not long before the first major snow of the season, I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on an essay. The house was quiet except for the usual rattling. Then, from upstairs, I heard a faint moaning. It was like a low, anguished cry, barely audible, but enough to freeze my blood. I sprang to my feet, every nerve on edge. For a good minute, I just stood there, trying to decide if I should leave. But the moaning stopped as quickly as it started, and the silence felt heavier than before. That was when Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. I darted to meet her, refusing to stay alone a second longer. The man at the top of the stairs. All these unsettling incidents set the stage for the single scariest experience of my life. It was well into winter by then. The temperature had plummeted, and the sky looked perpetually gray, as though day was trapped in perpetual dusk. I was anxious every time Mom dropped me off at the Ghould House, so I took to waiting in the front hallway instead of venturing deeper inside. At least there, I could see if Sarah's car arrived. It made me feel less exposed. On this particular afternoon, a storm was brewing, a nasty one. The local newscaster had warned of a moderate blizzard. Snow was already falling, swirling around as gusts of wind howled through the pines. When Mom stopped the car in the driveway, it was already dark. Winter in Maine tends to steal daylight early, so by 5 o'clock, it felt like night. She pulled up near the porch, and we both checked to see if Sarah's car was in sight. It wasn't. Mom frowned. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I can stay for a minute if you want." I forced a smile, despite the dread gnawing at me. "No, it's fine," I mumbled, clinging to my backpack. "I'll just wait inside. Sarah will probably be back soon." Mom nodded and watched me climb the steps. A swirl of icy wind nearly tore the front door from my grip as I opened it. I turned, saw her still waiting in the car, her headlights illuminating the porch. She refused to leave until she was sure I could get inside. I forced the door shut behind me, feeling the weight of that ancient house descend on me at once. I could taste the dust in the air. For some reason, the interior seemed darker than usual, as if every corner was stained with a deeper blackness. I took off my coat in the narrow front hall, trying to calm my breath. The plan was to wait, maybe 30 seconds until Mom drove away, then dart back out to wave if I got too scared. Childish, maybe, but I was ready to do anything to avoid staying there alone. Then, on a whim, I lifted my gaze toward the second floor, though I can't say what compelled me to do so. Something about the silence felt wrong, like the hush before a predator pounces. I took off my coat in the narrow front hall, trying to calm my breath. The plan was to wait, maybe 30 seconds until Mom drove away, then dart back out to wave if I got too scared. Childish, maybe, but I was ready to do anything to avoid staying there alone. Then, on a whim, I lifted my gaze toward the second floor, though I can't say what compelled me to do so. Something about the silence felt wrong, like the hush before a predator pounces. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the top of the stairs, leaning over the banister, his outline illuminated by the faint glow of a small night light in the upstairs bathroom behind him. It was the perfect silhouette of a man, broad shoulders, a fairly tall frame, and the rigid posture of someone waiting. The shape of his head and neck looked old-fashioned, somehow, like maybe he was wearing a suit. I couldn't see details, only the black outline in the eerie glow. I froze, my mind racing. There was absolutely no one else who should have been in the house. Sarah and her daughter were out. Noah was working late. Yet here was this stranger. A man, quietly standing there, gazing down at me. The tension in that moment was excruciating. My heart throbbed painfully in my chest. My throat went bone dry. I did the only thing that made sense. I called out Noah's name, hoping, praying that maybe Sarah's fiancé had come home early. My voice cracked as I said, "Noah?" But the figure didn't move. Not a shift of weight or a tilt of the head. And no answer came, only that unbearable silence. Yet I could hear him breathing. It was faint, but clear, a labored breath. We locked eyes, or at least, I felt certain he was staring at me, though I couldn't see his face. He just stood there, shoulders rising and falling, as though inhaling deeply. An oppressive fear squeezed my chest. The edges of my vision blurred, and every instinct shrieked at me to run. My fingers fumbled behind me, searching for the doorknob. Finally, they found the cold metal. In a single, breathless motion, I flung the door open and dashed outside. The Arctic wind that greeted me was harsh, stinging my cheeks with needle-like snow. But I didn't care. I skidded across the icy porch, jumped down the front steps, and landed in the yard, losing my balance as my boots slipped. The adrenaline masked the pain of the fall. My mother had already driven off. Her taillights were nowhere to be seen. Alone with the house looming behind me, I tried to think of what to do next. I looked at the neighbor's house. Lights flickered warmly in their windows, but for some inexplicable reason, I didn't run straight there. Something compelled me to stay close, maybe a sense of loyalty to Sarah, maybe fear that the man inside might vanish if I didn't keep watch. If an intruder was truly in the house, I wanted to warn her. I ended up lingering at the edge of the driveway, where I could see the front door and also remain close enough to bolt for the neighbor if need be. It was snowing harder now, flakes swirling in a chaotic dance under the street lamps. I stood there 15 or 20 minutes, shivering despite my thick coat and scarf. My teeth chattered, but I felt no desire to move. The horror and adrenaline surging through me was stronger than my discomfort. Every crunch in the snow, every groan of the wind made me spin around, half certain the man would appear behind me. My breath formed little clouds in the darkness as I tried to steady myself. Eventually, Sarah's car headlights caught through the blowing snow. Relief and dread collided in my chest as I waved frantically for her to stop. She jumped out, alarmed to see me shaking. Out there, my lips nearly blue from the cold. I tried to speak, but jumbled phrases poured out. "Man inside, top of the stairs, Noah?" Sarah's worried gaze darted to the dark windows of the house. Eventually, Sarah's car headlights caught through the blowing snow. Relief and dread collided in my chest as I waved frantically for her to stop. She jumped out, alarmed to see me shaking. Out there, my lips nearly blue from the cold. I tried to speak, but jumbled phrases poured out. "Man inside, top of the stairs, Noah?" Sarah's worried gaze darted to the dark windows of the house. We huddled with the neighbor, who let us use their phone to call the police. This was 1996, and nobody had a cell phone. The police arrived, 2 officers in thick winter jackets, and searched the entire property. They went room to room, checked the basement, attic, closets, even the barn out back. They found no one, no footprints leading away from the house except for my own, which ended near the driveway. The snow was pristine, otherwise unbroken. The officers concluded that maybe I'd seen a trick of the light, but their eyes said they believed I believed what I saw. One of them, older with a lined face, and sharp gaze, asked me quietly, "Are you sure it was a person? Could it have been a shadow?" I could only nod, numb. "I saw him breathe," I replied. The officer looked unsettled but kept his expression neutral. He left soon after. And from that night on, I refused to step foot in that house without another person physically beside me. I made my mother pick me up from school and keep me in her car until she finished her work shift. I would rather sit in a freezing car for hours than risk encountering that man again. Babysitting and the little girl. As the weeks went on, the strangeness in the Ghould House escalated in subtle but terrifying ways. Sarah still insisted the place was fine. She was more annoyed than frightened by the occasional flickering light bulbs and odd footsteps. Yet she recognized some force was at play. Perhaps she just didn't want to believe it could harm her or her daughter, Lily, who was 3 years old. I often babysat Lily in the evenings while Sarah did laundry or dashed out to grab groceries. One snowy night, Lily sat in the living room, doodling on paper with crayons while I cleaned up in the kitchen. I was washing dishes at the sink, which was positioned right beneath a window. Since it was dark outside, that window acted like a mirror. I could see myself in the kitchen reflected in the glass. Suddenly, in the reflection, I noticed a small figure walk behind me. My immediate thought, Lily. She'd left the living room and was headed into the small guest room off to the right of the kitchen. That guest room had heavy exercise equipment, a treadmill, old barbells, things you didn't want a child playing with. So I turned quickly, wiping my hands on a dish towel, and followed. But when I stepped into the guest room and flipped on the light, it was empty. There was nowhere to hide. Just a treadmill in one corner, some boxes on the floor, and a musty old trunk. Confused, I called Lily's name. To my shock, she answered from the living room. "Yes, I'm in here." I froze, goosebumps prickling my arms. I hurried back to the living room, heart hammering, and saw Lily sitting on the floor, crayons scattered around her coloring book. She hadn't left that spot at all. Slowly, I backed away until my spine was pressed against the wall, trembling. Something had walked behind me in the kitchen, something child-sized. I know what I saw. The reflection in that window was unmistakable. A small girl, at most 4 or 5, with curly hair and a white nightgown, stepping quietly into the guest room. I spent the rest of the evening in the living room with Lily, not daring to turn off the overhead light. An invisible force on the stairs. An invisible force on the stairs. My sister herself had a series of terrifying encounters with the house's intangible occupants. One particularly dangerous incident happened when she was carrying Lily down the steep staircase from the second floor. Sarah's foot slipped, or so she thought at first, and she tumbled forward, Lily clutched in her arms. By some miracle, she managed to twist her body so that Lily landed on top of her, unhurt. Sarah, though, suffered bruises up and down her back. She confided in me later that she didn't just slip. She felt a force shove her from behind. She described it like a two-handed push squarely between her shoulder blades. "It felt like someone wanted me to fall," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't explain it any other way." Another time, I nearly had a similar accident, though I wasn't carrying a child. I was at the very top step when a peculiar sensation tugged at me, like invisible hands grasping my shoulders, pulling me up onto my tiptoes. My entire body pitched forward, and I had to grab the railing with both hands to keep from plummeting. My arms shook violently afterward. There was no logical reason for that shift in balance. Yet it happened, and I knew well by then that the house did not want us there. The ladies in black. Perhaps the eeriest story came from Lily herself. She was so young that she didn't fully grasp the gravity of what she was describing. One morning over breakfast, she asked Sarah with wide-eyed innocence, "Who are the ladies who come into my room at night to clean?" Sarah nearly dropped her coffee mug. "What do you mean, sweetie?" she asked, forcing a smile. "What ladies?" Lily continued. "They wear black dresses and white hats. They'd pick up my toys and they'd fold my blankets." The toddler said it so casually, so matter of fact, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sarah stared at her, horrified, trying to figure out how to respond. She asked Lily if the ladies ever spoke, and Lily just shook her head. "They're really quiet," she said. "I can't see their faces because they don't look at me." Sarah questioned if Lily had dreamed it, but Lily insisted. "They do it every night. Sometimes they stand by my bed. Then they leave." She shrugged, as if to say, "It's just what happens." Sarah was so disturbed she had to leave the room for a moment. Later, she confided in me that Lily described the old-fashioned dresses from the attic photos almost exactly. Thick black frocks, stiff white collars, and small hats perched on top of tightly pinned hair. Lily's vocabulary might not have known how to say bonnet, but from her description, Sarah had no doubts. She recognized the outfits from those dusty, decades-old photographs of the Ghould women, nightmares, and the Ghould family history. Even before the terrifying encounter with the man at the top of the stairs, I'd had nightmares about Ghould House ever since I first set foot on the property. They were never consistent. In some dreams, I found myself lost in the second-floor corridor, unable to find the staircase that led back down. In others, I wandered the attic, rummaging through old photographs, only to come face to face with the breathless silhouette that loomed above me like a black stain. Even before the terrifying encounter with the man at the top of the stairs, I'd had nightmares about Ghould House ever since I first set foot on the property. They were never consistent. In some dreams, I found myself lost in the second-floor corridor, unable to find the staircase that led back down. In others, I wandered the attic, rummaging through old photographs, only to come face to face with the breathless silhouette that loomed above me like a black stain. One recurring dream showed me a funeral procession, women in black dresses and white hats, carrying small flickering lanterns. They trudged across the yard into the barn out back. I'd watched them from my bedroom window, though in the dream, I never knew which room I was in. I'd see them gather in a circle around the casket, chanting in low voices, though I couldn't make out the words. I'd always wake before they finished. Later, after the man on the staircase incident, these nightmares intensified. I spoke with Sarah about them, though I doubted she wanted the details. She admitted she was also having strange dreams, often about the house's previous owners. She said she once dreamed of an old man in a battered top hat, holding a lantern and stumbling across the second floor landing. In her dream, the man's face was twisted with sorrow or rage. She couldn't tell which. Curious, Sarah began doing some research on the Ghould family through local archives and newspapers. She learned bits and pieces that the family had originally come from Europe in the 1800s, that the patriarch, Henry Ghould, built the house in the mid-19th century, that tragedies struck them regularly. Several children had died young. A rumor circulated about an illicit business Henry ran from the barn, though official records didn't confirm it. More than one child in the family was said to have died in that house, succumbing to disease or injury. One newspaper snippet from the early 1900s detailed a series of unfortunate accidents that befell the last known occupant of the Ghould line. I only got a glimpse of these articles, but I read enough to piece together that the place had a very dark history. If any building could be haunted, this one certainly had the qualifications. Isolation in a Maine winter. Winter in Maine can be isolating under the best conditions. The nights are long, the cold is relentless, and storms can strand entire neighborhoods. For Sarah, who lived out there with Lily and Noah, the isolation took on a new, menacing dimension. Whenever the storms rolled in, the electricity would flicker, and the house seemed to come to life. The wind keened around the corners, seeping through the old windows, making the curtains dance. At night, Sarah swore she heard voices whispering in the hall, and multiple times she would burst out of her bedroom, flipping on the lights, only to find the corridor empty. Lily, woken by the noise, would peer out from her doorway, wide-eyed and confused. Noah tried to rationalize it. "Old houses have drafts," he said. "They make weird noises. It's probably the wind vibrating through the walls." But even he was troubled by the frequency and intensity of these disturbances. At first, he'd brushed them off, but I saw the changes in him. The deepening circles under his eyes, the way he flinched at harmless sounds like a door creaking. Once, I overheard him on the phone with a contractor, begging the man to come out and check the foundation and insulation. "There's got to be something causing these noises," he insisted. He seemed desperate for a practical explanation. But if the house wanted them gone, it did not intend to give them any illusions of normalcy. Snow piled up outside, and inside, the tension was claustrophobic. Sarah called me once in a state of near panic after a particularly violent storm. She'd heard footsteps rushing up and down the stairs all night, doors slamming when no one was there. Lily had awakened, screaming about a bad man in the closet. They'd found the closet door wide open, though. Sarah swore she'd closed it earlier. When they tried to flick on the hallway light, they discovered the bulb had shattered, shards of glass scattered on the wooden floor. If that's not pure malice, I don't know what is. But if the house wanted them gone, it did not intend to give them any illusions of normalcy. Snow piled up outside, and inside, the tension was claustrophobic. Sarah called me once in a state of near panic after a particularly violent storm. She'd heard footsteps rushing up and down the stairs all night, doors slamming when no one was there. Lily had awakened, screaming about a bad man in the closet. They'd found the closet door wide open, though. Sarah swore she closed it earlier. When they tried to flick on the hallway light, they discovered the bulb had shattered, shards of glass scattered on the wooden floor. If that's not pure malice, I don't know what is. A desperate attempt at cleansing. The push down the stairs, the nightmares, the apparitions, the shattered light bulbs. By now it was clear that something unnatural clung to this house. Sarah eventually confided in an old friend, Mary, who claimed to be sensitive to the spirit world. Mary wasn't a medium by trade, but she dabbled in local ghost hunting circles and had performed a few home blessings using sage and prayers. With nowhere else to turn, Sarah asked Mary to come by one evening to see if she could pick up on any energies in the house. I happened to be there that evening because my mother was working late, and my dread about being in the house, though intense, was overshadowed by my morbid curiosity to see what might happen. Noah was present too, though deeply skeptical. Mary arrived around twilight, a small, unassuming woman with kind eyes. She brought a bundle of dried sage, a prayer book, and a silver bell. Sarah led Mary through each room, describing the phenomena. Mary frowned often, shutting her eyes as if listening for something. "It's very active," she muttered at one point, taking in the swirling gloom of the upstairs hallway. She pointed to Lily's bedroom. "There are presences in here, older female energies, I think. Not necessarily malicious, but they're restless." When we reached the stairs, Mary hesitated, holding the banister. "This spot," she said, slowly, "is heavy. Like someone stood here for a long time, waiting or watching." A cold shudder rippled through me. I recalled the night I'd seen the silhouette of that man. Mary looked at me, her expression solemn, but she said nothing more. She proceeded to light the sage, letting its pungent smoke drift through each room. She recited prayers in a low voice, occasionally flicking droplets of blessed water into corners. The rest of us followed in an uneasy procession. I could almost feel the house react. Windows rattled, the old pipes groaned as though in protest. Lily, clinging to Sarah's hand, started to cry. The moment Mary began her prayers in Lily's bedroom, the overhead light sputtered. Lily screamed that the shadow of a tall man was standing in the corner. None of us saw it, but the room felt ice cold. My breath fogged in the air. After Mary finished her cleansing, she told Sarah and Noah to open all the windows for a few minutes, even in the bitter cold, to let any malevolent energy escape. We stood there, teeth chattering as snow blew in, listening to Mary's repeated chant. Eventually the night settled into a strained quiet. Mary turned to Sarah, offering a small, tight smile. "I've done what I can," she said softly, "but I think there's something deeply rooted here. You might want to consider moving." She spoke gently, but the words were a gut punch to Sarah and Noah. Financially, they couldn't just pick up and leave. Final acts of terror. Final acts of terror. In the weeks after Mary's attempted cleansing, the activities in the Ghould House changed in nature. They didn't stop. Rather, they became sporadic, unpredictable, and at times more violent. The sense of a presence grew stronger, as though the entity was agitated by Mary's interference. Furniture would inexplicably shift positions overnight. Doors would slam repeatedly at odd hours, even on still nights with no wind. Electronic devices, radios, clocks stopped working altogether or blared static for no reason. One afternoon, my brother Eric and I were in the living room, waiting for Sarah to bring Lily back from a birthday party. A sudden crash shattered the silence. We rushed to the dining room to find a chandelier, a cheap, modern replacement, not an antique, had fallen from the ceiling, glass shards exploding across the table and floor. If anyone had been in there, they could have been badly injured. We exchanged uneasy looks, then waited outside for Sarah. Our eyes kept creeping up to the second-floor windows, half expecting to see that man's silhouette glaring down. Sarah's nightmares escalated too. She began talking in her sleep, muttering about Henry Ghould and a betrayal, though she had never read about any such betrayal in the archives. She described seeing black-clad women gathering in the yard, chanting at her window, their voices rising in a dirge. Night after night, she woke drenched in sweat. Noah, sleep-deprived and on edge, grew irritable and short-tempered. Arguments between them flared. Lily's behavior changed as well. She became quiet, withdrawn. Sarah found her one morning, crouched in her closet, refusing to come out. She said the ladies in black were angry. That, more than anything, terrified Sarah. Finally, the decision was made. They had to leave. Sarah and Noah didn't have a clear plan. Maybe move in with our mother temporarily, or find another rental. But the situation in that house had become untenable. Family or no family, finances or no finances, they couldn't risk Lily's safety or their own sanity. By late February, Sarah and Noah began packing their belongings, carefully avoiding the attic where the old trunks and photographs remained. I was relieved, imagining that once they left, the nightmares would stop. Over the span of several days, they filled boxes, dismantled furniture, and arranged for a truck. Tension hung in the air, but surprisingly, the house was eerily calm. It was as if the presence there knew they were going and was waiting, biding its time. On one of the final nights, I came over to help. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. Sarah and Noah were sealing the last few boxes in the living room, while Lily slept on an air mattress in the corner, bundled under blankets. I remember Sarah joking weakly, "After all this, the place almost looks cozy with nothing in it." Noah just grunted. At some point, we all drifted off. The exhaustion of packing overcame our vigilance. In the dead of night, I woke to Lily screaming. My eyes flew open, and I sat up to see her thrashing in her blankets, eyes wide with terror. In the faint moonlight, I caught sight of a shape near the foot of her mattress, a tall, dark outline blocking the window. My skin crawled. Sarah and Noah jolted awake. They saw it too, I'm certain. Noah let out a startled curse, scrambling to his feet. Sarah lunged for Lily, who was sobbing uncontrollably. At some point, we all drifted off. The exhaustion of packing overcame our vigilance. In the dead of night, I woke to Lily screaming. My eyes flew open, and I sat up to see her thrashing in her blankets, eyes wide with terror. In the faint moonlight, I caught sight of a shape near the foot of her mattress, a tall, dark outline blocking the window. My skin crawled. Sarah and Noah jolted awake. They saw it too, I'm certain. Noah let out a startled curse, scrambling to his feet. Sarah lunged for Lily, who was sobbing uncontrollably. But the shape drifted backward, shrinking into the shadows. When Noah flicked on his flashlight, it revealed only the empty corner, the old radiator hissing steam. No footprints, no sign of any intruder. The presence had come to say goodbye. It seemed to remind us that it was still there. We spent the rest of that night wide awake, lights on, arms around Lily. No one dared close their eyes again. They moved out the next morning, loading what they could onto the truck and leaving behind whatever wasn't essential. The final drive away from Ghould House was a silent one. No cheers, no relief. Just a bone-deep weariness and the sense that we were escaping something older and darker than we knew. Lingering fear. Years have passed, and I sometimes catch myself wondering if the Ghould House still stands. I'd heard rumors that someone new tried to renovate it, maybe even turn it into a bed-and breakfast or a small inn. But I never mustered the courage to go back and check. It remains, anchored in my mind, a place of impossible shadows and watchful dread. I still have nightmares occasionally, dreams of a silent figure at the top of a staircase, beckoning me forward, or black-clad women shuffling through dusty rooms, adjusting furniture, folding blankets, piling toys in neat stacks, never once glancing my way. In those dreams, the walls seem to whisper with ancient voices. I wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced for a moment that I'm 12 years old again, shivering at the edge of the driveway, watching the snow bury my footprints, praying for headlights to appear and take me away. People ask if I believe in ghosts. I can't give them a definitive yes, but I also can't say no. Something dwells in that old Maine house, something intangible and menacing tied to a tragic family legacy. Whether it's a restless spirit, a psychic echo, or a product of fevered imaginations, I do not know. But I know what I felt and saw there. I know how it changed me, how it kept me up at night, turning my stomach cold with fear that no rational explanation could soothe. Sometimes, I wonder about the faint footprints in the snow that never appeared, about the man who vanished from the top of the stairs. I wonder if the house is relieved of its torment, or if it still stands watch over a lonely stretch of property, waiting for new occupants to claim and terrify. In the end, I suspect the Ghould House is not done with those who dare cross its threshold. Its walls contain the residue of centuries' worth of sorrow, anger, and longing, a perfect recipe for a haunting. If you ever find yourself driving along the back roads of southern Maine on a cold winter night, and you spot a looming structure against the sky, shuttered windows like empty sockets, walk away. I speak from experience. No matter how beautiful the architecture or how affordable the rent, some houses are not meant to be homes. They are vessels for echoes, for tragedies that refuse to die. If you decide to ignore that instinct, remember my story. Remember the man at the top of the stairs, the child's reflection in the kitchen window, the silent ladies in black with white hats. Remember how it feels to sense a presence breathing inches away, dark, patient, unspeakably ancient. If you ever find yourself driving along the back roads of southern Maine on a cold winter night, and you spot a looming structure against the sky, shuttered windows like empty sockets, walk away. I speak from experience. No matter how beautiful the architecture or how affordable the rent, some houses are not meant to be homes. They are vessels for echoes, for tragedies that refuse to die. If you decide to ignore that instinct, remember my story. Remember the man at the top of the stairs, the child's reflection in the kitchen window, the silent ladies in black with white hats. Remember how it feels to sense a presence breathing inches away, dark, patient, unspeakably ancient. And if by some chance you see a silhouette in a hallway, its shoulders rising and falling with each breath, do yourself a favor, run. Because once you stood in the Ghould House and felt that gaze pierce your soul, you'll forever doubt the safety of any silent room, any dark corner, any quiet stairwell. You'll find yourself reaching for a doorknob, breath seized in your lungs, wondering if you're alone, or if a phantom stands just beyond your sight, waiting for you to make the first move. That is the burden this place inflicted on me, and it's one I carry to this day. The terror doesn't vanish when you leave the property. It latches onto your memories, twisting them into midnight whispers and unexplained shadows that flicker in the corners of your bedroom. It ensures you never fully dismiss the possibility that some houses hold secrets too profound, too dreadful, to be allowed the label of mere superstition. The Ghould House remains, in my mind, the quintessential haunted home, the place that taught me a terrible truth: we are not always alone, and not every unseen occupant means us well. Some simply dwell in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to let us know they are there, and that we, fragile and unsuspecting, have trespassed upon their domain. So believe me or don't believe me, that choice is yours. But do not be surprised if one day you drive past a lonely old house, see a light in the upstairs window, and spot a figure just inside, watching. Don't be surprised if you feel the hairs on your arms rise and the compulsion to run surges through your veins. When it happens, as it did to me on that cold, blizzardy evening at the Ghould House, heed that instinct. There are things in this world beyond reason or logic. Their presence can chill your blood, push you down a flight of stairs, or whisper nightmares into the ear of a sleeping child. Call it haunting, Call it a manifestation of restless spirits, the name hardly matters. All that matters is survival and the knowledge that not all houses offer sanctuary. For that reason, I'll never forget those rooms, those nights, that icy bite of fear. I'll never forget the silhouette that stood there, nearly indistinct but utterly malevolent, gazing down at me as if I'd intruded upon sacred ground. Above all, I'll never forget how quickly I ran from that hallway, how the snow embraced me like a friend while the house loomed behind me, silent and enraged. Some experiences leave an imprint so deep, it's more than a memory. It's part of you, fusing with your spirit as surely as any scar on your flesh. This is my scar, my story. May it stand as a warning to anyone who dares question whether certain places can truly be evil, whether a structure of wood and stone can harbor something twisted and malignant. The Ghould House taught me the answer is yes. And to this day, I am convinced that if I lingered there one more minute, if I had just stayed in that foyer or walked up that staircase to confront that faceless man, I might never have come back down. I might have joined the quiet ranks of unseen figures drifting in its halls, never free, always watching, longing, waiting for the next soul to cross its threshold and wonder if ghosts might be real.